If you're new here, subscribe and hit like. You keep these stories alive. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Elise's hands trembled as she lifted the crystal decanter, the weight of it suddenly unbearable in her sweating palms. The grand dining hall of the imperial palace stretched before her like a gilded cathedral, chandeliers dripping light onto the faces of Vienna's most powerful aristocrats. She was invisible here, as all servants were, moving between the nobles like ghosts, filling glasses, clearing plates, existing only to serve. She'd done this 1,000 times, poured wine for archdukes, generals, foreign dignitaries. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the tension crackling through the room as diplomats argued in hushed tones about borders and alliances. Maybe it was exhaustion. She'd been on her feet for 14 hours. Or maybe it was him. Archduke Leopold von Habsburg sat at the head of the table like a young god carved from marble and arrogance. 28 years old, third in line to the throne, and devastatingly aware of his own beauty. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, and his grey eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that made men twice his age defer to him. He was speaking in rapid French to the Prussian ambassador, his voice smooth and confident, completely unconcerned with anyone beneath his station, which meant he didn't even glance at Elise as she approached to refill his glass. She steadied her breathing, lifted the decanter, began to pour. That's when the Prussian ambassador laughed too loudly, gesturing wildly, and his elbow knocked into Elise's arm. The wine splashed, a crimson arc across Leopold's pristine white jacket. Time stopped. The entire table fell silent. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Elise's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. I'm so sorry, Your Highness, Of course you are. Leopold's voice cut through her apology, like a blade through silk. He stood slowly, looking down at the wine staining his clothes, then up at her with an expression of pure contempt. Tell me, what is your name? Elise, Your Highness. Elise. He repeated it like it tasted bad. Do you have any idea how much this jacket costs, Elise? No, of course you don't. Your entire year's wages wouldn't cover the buttons. Laughter rippled around the table. He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne, something expensive and foreign. But then, servants like you can barely speak proper German, let alone understand what happens in rooms like this. Isn't that right? Her cheeks burned. She kept her eyes lowered, hating the sting of tears threatening to surface. Yes, Your Highness. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. She forced herself to meet his gaze. Those grey eyes were ice-cold, completely devoid of mercy. You're dismissed. Send someone competent to clean this mess. He waved his hand as if shooing away a fly. And don't let me see your face serving at my table again. More laughter. Someone made a joke in French about the incompetence of palace staff. Elise's hands shook as she set down the decanter and backed away, her face hot with humiliation. She caught sight of herself in one of the ornate mirrors lining the walls, a plain girl in a grey servant's dress, forgettable brown hair pulled back. Nothing special, nothing worth noticing. She fled from the dining hall, her throat tight. In the servants' corridor, she finally let herself breathe, let the tears come. Not because of the ruined jacket or even the cruel words, but because of the laughter, the way every single person in that room had looked at her like she was nothing, the way he hadn't even bothered to learn her name before tonight, despite her serving his family for 6 years. Elise? Maria, one of the older kitchen maids, touched her shoulder. Don't let him get to you, child. These aristocrats, they think their titles make them gods. He's right, though. Elise whispered, wiping her eyes. I am nothing here. You are more than they'll ever see. Maria squeezed her hand. Now go wash your face. The Archduchess will want her tea prepared before bed. Elise nodded, steadying herself. She'd survived worse than a spoiled prince's cruelty. She'd survived this too. But as she climbed the back stairs toward the Archduchess's chambers, she let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it would feel like to show Archduke Leopold exactly how wrong he was about her. She had no idea that in less than 48 hours, she'd get that chance. The imperial palace exploded into chaos 2 days later, when the diplomatic summit began. Elise had been reassigned to serving tea in the antechambers, far from Leopold, thankfully. But even from the outer rooms, she could hear the tension building. Representatives from 5 nations had gathered in Vienna for what everyone whispered was the most critical alliance negotiation in a generation. Austria-Hungary needed allies, needed them desperately. The Russian Empire loomed to the east, hungry and unpredictable. Prussia grew stronger by the day, and the smaller Italian states held the key to crucial Mediterranean trade routes. If this summit failed, if the alliance collapsed, war was inevitable. Elise understood this better than anyone realized. She'd grown up in these palace halls after her parents died. Her Polish mother had been a seamstress here, her Italian father a merchant who'd sold fabrics to the court. She'd been 7 when they both succumbed to fever, and the palace staff had quietly kept her, training her as a servant. Nobody paid attention to the little girl in the grey dress, which meant she'd spent 18 years absorbing everything, including languages. Her mother had taught her Polish and German, her father, Italian. An elderly Russian governess who'd taken pity on the orphaned child had taught her Russian during stolen hours in the library. And French, well, French was the language of the court. She heard it every day, learned it from eavesdropping on aristocratic conversations, from reading books she wasn't supposed to touch. Hungarian she'd picked up from the kitchen staff, who spoke it among themselves when they didn't want the Austrian nobles to understand their gossip. 5 languages, fluent in all of them, but she'd never told anyone. Why would she? Servants were supposed to be invisible, ignorant, forgettable. Revealing her education would only make her suspect, strange, threatening to people who needed to believe themselves superior. So she'd stayed silent, stayed invisible, until the screaming started. Elise was refilling the samovar in the antechamber when she heard the commotion from the main conference room. Raised voices in multiple languages, all talking over each other, chairs scraping, something crashing, glass breaking. The door burst open, and Leopold strode out, his face pale, jaw clenched. He was followed by an older man in military dress. General Richter, she recognized him, who was speaking urgently in German. "Your Highness, we must find another translator immediately. The summit cannot proceed without—" "I'm aware of that." Leopold's voice was sharp with barely controlled panic. "But where the hell am I supposed to find someone who speaks Russian, Hungarian, Italian, and French fluently in the next 5 minutes? The embassy might— The embassies are 3 hours away. We don't have 3 hours. The Russian ambassador is already threatening to leave. The Hungarian delegation is insulted because no one can understand their concerns, and the Italians refuse to trust any Austrian translator." He ran his hand through his dark hair, destroying its perfect styling. "This is a disaster. An absolute disaster." Elise's heart started to pound. She knew she should stay quiet, should remain invisible. It wasn't her place to interfere in matters of state, but the Empire needed help, and she could give it. Her hands trembled as she set down the tea tray. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Highness?" Leopold spun around, his eyes wild with stress, and for a moment he didn't even recognize her. Then his expression shifted to one of irritation. "Not now. Whatever menial problem you have, it can—" He stopped, looked at her more closely. "You, the one who ruined my jacket." "Yes, Your Highness." She swallowed hard. I can help." "Help? You?" He laughed, but it was edged with hysteria. "Unless you've suddenly learned 5 languages in the past 2 days, I don't think—" "I speak 5 languages, Your Highness." The words fell into sudden silence. Leopold stared at her. General Richter stared at her. From inside the conference room, she could still hear the multilingual argument growing louder. "What did you say?" Leopold's voice was dangerously quiet. "I speak German, French, Russian, Hungarian, and Italian, fluently." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I can translate for the summit." Leopold felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The servant girl, the clumsy, forgettable servant girl he'd humiliated 2 nights ago, was standing before him claiming to speak 5 languages. It was absurd, impossible, some kind of desperate bid for attention. But desperation made people do stupid things, and God knew he was desperate. "Prove it," he said coldly. "Say something in Russian." She spoke, her voice suddenly transformed, smoother, more confident, the pronunciation perfect. He didn't speak Russian himself, but he'd heard enough of it to recognize authenticity. "Italian," he demanded. She switched languages seamlessly, the words flowing like music. That he understood. His mother had made him learn Italian, and it was flawless, natural, not the halting recitation of a student, but the fluid speech of a native speaker. Hungarian, again, perfect. The general, who spoke Hungarian, inhaled sharply. "Your Highness," Richter said quietly, "she's legitimate." Leopold's mind reeled. How was this possible? This girl who served tea, who he'd dismissed as barely educated, spoke 5 languages better than most of the court's official translators. It made no sense. It violated everything he understood about the natural order of things. From inside the conference room, the Russian ambassador's voice rose in anger. He didn't have time to question it. "Come with me." He grabbed her arm, felt her flinch at the contact, and pulled her toward the conference room doors. "If you're lying to me, if you embarrass me in there, I will personally ensure you never work in this city again. Understood?" "Yes, Your Highness." He pushed open the doors. The scene inside was pure chaos. 5 men around a massive table, all shouting simultaneously. The Russian ambassador, Count Volkonsky, red-faced and gesturing wildly. The Hungarian delegation leader, Baron Széchenyi, standing with arms crossed in furious silence. The Italian representatives looking ready to walk out. The Prussian observer taking notes with a smug expression, clearly enjoying Austria's humiliation. They all fell silent when Leopold entered with Elise at his side. "Gentlemen," Leopold said, his voice ringing with authority he didn't feel, "may I present your new translator?" Count Volkonsky's eyes narrowed. He spoke in rapid Russian, probably some insulting question about Leopold's judgment. Before Leopold could even begin to formulate a response, Elise stepped forward and answered. In perfect Russian, her tone respectful but firm. The Count's eyebrows shot up. He asked another question. She answered. Back and forth, a rapid exchange that Leopold couldn't follow, but he watched the Russian's expression shift from skepticism to surprise to grudging respect. Baron Széchenyi said something in Hungarian, a test clearly. Elise turned to him and responded fluently, and the Baron actually smiled. The Italians tried next, and she handled them just as easily, her Italian carrying a Roman accent that made them lean forward with interest. Leopold felt something strange unfurling in his chest, something uncomfortable. She was extraordinary. This servant girl he'd mocked, whose name he'd barely remembered, was commanding the attention of 5 of Europe's most powerful diplomats with nothing but her voice and her mind. "Shall we begin?" she asked quietly, looking at him for permission. He nodded, unable to find words. She took a seat at the table. Servants didn't sit, but no one objected, and began to translate. Not just words, but nuance, tone, intent. She caught the subtle implications in the Russians' demands, the wounded pride in the Hungarians' complaints, the commercial interests hidden in the Italians' proposals. She wove between languages so smoothly that the conversation finally began to flow, barriers dissolving. Leopold sank into his own chair watching her, really watching her for the first time. She wasn't plain. He'd been wrong about that. Her face held a quiet intelligence that made her features striking once you actually looked. Her brown eyes were sharp, missing nothing, and when she spoke Italian, something about the way her mouth shaped the words made his breath catch. He realized with a start that he was staring at her lips. What the hell was wrong with him? The first 24 hours of negotiations blurred together in Elise's mind like a fevered dream. She translated for 16 hours straight, breaking only when the diplomats needed rest. Her voice grew hoarse, her back ached from sitting, but she couldn't stop. The fate of nations rested on her ability to bridge these linguistic divides, and the weight of it was terrifying and exhilarating. But what made her hands tremble, what made her heart race every time she paused to sip water, wasn't the pressure of the work. It was Leopold. He sat beside her throughout the negotiations, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that when she leaned in to whisper a translation meant only for him, her lips nearly brushed his ear. She tried not to notice how he tensed when she did that, tried not to notice the way his eyes tracked her every movement, tried not to notice how devastatingly beautiful he was when he was thinking, his brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers drumming absently on the mahogany table. "Tell Count Volkonsky," Leopold murmured during a brief pause, "that we can agree to reduced tariffs on grain imports, but we need assurances about military support if Prussia becomes aggressive." Elise translated, her voice low. The Count responded, and she turned back to Leopold, leaning close again. "He says Russia has no interest in defending Austrian interests unless Austria demonstrates commitment to—" "I know what he's implying." Leopold's jaw clenched. "Tell him we're not giving them access to our southern ports. That's non-negotiable." As she translated, their hands accidentally touched on the document they were both reaching for. The contact was electric, shocking. Both of them froze for half a second before pulling away. Elise felt her cheeks flush. She kept her eyes on the papers, refusing to look at him, but she could feel his gaze on her profile, burning, questioning. The negotiations continued, but something had shifted in the air between them. During a break, when the diplomats stepped out to smoke and argue privately, Leopold stood and stretched. Elise remained seated, reviewing her notes, trying to ignore how aware she was of him moving around the room. "You lied to me." His voice came from directly behind her chair. Her pulse jumped. "Your Highness? You said you could barely speak German, that's what I assumed anyway." He moved around to face her, leaning against the table, arms crossed. "You speak it perfectly, better than half the courtiers. You never asked what I could speak, Your Highness, you assumed. Don't." His voice was sharp. "Don't throw my words back at me." She looked up at him and found his grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made breathing difficult. This close, she could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his cravat had come slightly loose after hours of stress. "Why did you hide this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "These abilities you could have been working as an official translator. Better pay, better position. Why serve tea when you have a mind like this?" "Because minds like mine aren't supposed to exist in bodies like mine, Your Highness." She kept her voice steady. "I'm a servant, the illegitimate daughter of a seamstress and a merchant. If I'd revealed my education, I would have been dismissed as presumptuous, dangerous. Better to be invisible." Something flickered across his face. "It might have been shame." "I was cruel to you," he said abruptly. "At the dinner? Yes, you were. You're not going to accept a polite apology, are you?" "You haven't offered one, Your Highness. You've simply stated a fact." His lips twitched, almost a smile. "You're angry with me. I have no right to be angry with you, Your Highness. You're an archduke. I'm a servant who spilled wine on your jacket." "That's not an answer." She met his eyes, held his gaze. "Yes, I'm angry with you. You humiliated me in front of 40 people for an accident that wasn't even my fault. You assumed I was stupid because I was poor. You dismissed my entire existence without knowing anything about me. So yes, Your Highness, I'm angry." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Leopold did something that shocked her to her core. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, not at the head of the table where he'd been sitting during negotiations, right beside her, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. "You're right," he said quietly, "about all of it. I was arrogant and cruel and thoughtless. I'm sorry, Elise." He'd used her name. Not servant or girl, her actual name. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness," he continued, "but I'm asking for it anyway. What you're doing here, saving this alliance, possibly preventing a war, it's extraordinary. You're extraordinary. And I was too blind and stupid to see it." She should say something, accept his apology graciously, maintain professional distance. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "You're only saying this because you need me." "No." His voice was fierce. "I'm saying this because it's true and because I've spent the last 24 hours watching you outthink every man in that room, including me, and I can't stop." He stopped himself, looked away. "The diplomats will be back soon. We should prepare for the next session." But he didn't move, neither did she. "Your Highness," she said softly, "this can't—" "I know." He stood abruptly. "Believe me, I know." When the diplomats returned, Elise threw herself back into translating with almost desperate focus, anything to avoid thinking about the way her skin still tingled where his hand had accidentally touched hers, anything to avoid the dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. By the second day of negotiations, Leopold was losing his mind. He'd always prided himself on his self-control, on his ability to remain detached, analytical, focused on duty above all else. But Elise was destroying that control, one whispered translation at a time. Every time she leaned close to speak privately to him, he caught her scent. Something simple, maybe lavender soap, but it made him want to bury his face in her hair. Every time she bit her lip while thinking, he had to physically stop himself from reaching out to touch her mouth. And her voice, God, her voice when she spoke Italian, did something to him that was completely inappropriate given their circumstances. He was an archduke. She was a servant. This was impossible, forbidden, completely and utterly out of the question. So why couldn't he stop thinking about kissing her? "Your Highness?" Her voice pulled him from his spiraling thoughts. "Count Volkonsky asked if you're satisfied with the revised border proposal." He'd completely missed the question. He'd been too busy watching the way candlelight caught in her hair. Yes. Tell him we'll need to review the exact coordinates, but in principle we can agree." She translated, and Leopold forced himself to focus on the negotiations. This was too important. The alliance was close, so close, But one wrong move could collapse everything. He couldn't afford distractions, but that night, after the diplomats had finally retired and the palace settled into silence, Leopold found himself wandering the halls instead of sleeping. His mind wouldn't shut down. The negotiations, the pressure, the constant awareness of Elise sitting beside him for hours, it was all too much. He ended up in the library. The vast room was dark except for moonlight streaming through tall windows. He'd always found peace here among the books and silence. Except he wasn't alone. Elise sat curled in a window seat, a book in her lap, so absorbed she didn't hear him enter. She'd changed from her grey servant's dress into something simpler, a white nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her face. She looked young, vulnerable, heartbreakingly beautiful. Leopold knew he should leave, should turn around and walk away before she noticed him. Instead, he heard himself say, "What are you reading?" She startled, the book tumbling from her hands. He caught it before it hit the floor, some kind of French poetry collection. "Your Highness!" She scrambled to her feet, pulling the shawl tighter. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I shouldn't be here. I'll—" "Stay!" The word came out rougher than he intended. "Please, I couldn't sleep either." She hesitated, clearly uncertain. The proper thing would be for her to leave, for both of them to maintain the distance their positions required. "Talk to me," Leopold said quietly. "In Italian. I want to hear how it's supposed to sound." "Your Highness, I don't think—" "Please, Elise." He used her name again, deliberately, saw the way it affected her, the slight intake of breath, the widening of her eyes. "Just for a moment. Forget that I'm an archduke and you're— Forget all of it. Just talk to me." She sat back down slowly, and after a moment, he joined her on the window seat. Not touching, but close. So close. "What should I say?" she asked in Italian, her voice soft. "Anything. Tell me about the book. Tell me why you're awake. Tell me—" He switched to Italian himself, his accent rougher than hers, but serviceable. "Tell me if you've been thinking about me the way I've been thinking about you." Her breath caught. In the moonlight, he could see her cheeks flush. "We can't," she whispered, still in Italian. "You know we can't." "I know." He let himself look at her, really look, memorizing every detail of her face in the silver light. "But I need to know if I'm alone in this madness, if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, or if I'm just—" "You're not alone." The words were barely audible. "I think about you constantly. Every time I translate, every time you're near me, I forget how to breathe. And I know it's foolish and impossible and it will only end in heartbreak, but I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't stop." The confession hung between them like something fragile and precious. Leopold reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. Her skin was impossibly soft. "What are we doing?" she whispered. "Something incredibly stupid." His thumb brushed her lower lip and he felt her tremble. "But I don't care anymore. Tomorrow we'll go back to being who we're supposed to be. But right now, in this moment, can we just—" He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "One moment. That's all we can have. Then let's make it count." He kissed her. It was gentle at first, a soft press of lips, a question more than a demand. But then she made a small sound in her throat and kissed him back, and gentle became desperate, became consuming. His hands tangled in her hair, hers gripped his shirt. The book fell forgotten to the floor as they lost themselves in each other. She tasted like possibility, like everything he'd been taught to deny himself, like freedom. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Leopold rested his forehead against hers. "This is insane," he murmured. "Completely insane," she agreed. "We should stop." "We should." Neither of them moved. "Elise," he said softly, "what happens when the summit ends? When you go back to being a servant, and I go back to being an archduke who's expected to marry some princess I've never met? I don't know." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I'm trying not to think about it. That's the problem." He pulled back slightly, needing to see her face. "I can't stop thinking about it. About you. About how wrong it is that the most extraordinary woman I've ever met is someone I'm not allowed to want." Leopold, she dropped the title, saying his name for the first time, and it felt intimate in a way that made his chest ache. "Nothing good can come from this. You know that." "I know." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. I know, but right now I don't care." They stayed in the library until dawn crept over the Vienna skyline, talking in hushed Italian, stealing kisses between confessions, both knowing this stolen time was all they'd ever have. When pale light finally forced them back to reality, Elise stood reluctantly. "I need to go," she said, "before anyone sees me here." Leopold caught her hand. "Tonight, after the negotiations, meet me here again. We can't keep doing this. I know, but one more night, please." She looked at him with such longing it physically hurt. "One more night," she whispered. "Then we stop. We have to stop." "We will," he lied. "I promise." She left, and Leopold sat alone in the library as sunrise painted the room gold, knowing he'd just made a promise he had no intention of keeping. He was falling in love with her, and it was going to destroy them both. The whispers started on the third day. Elise felt them like eyes on her back as she moved through the palace corridors. Servants who'd never paid her any attention suddenly watched her with knowing looks. Courtiers she passed in hallways paused their conversations to stare. And worst of all, the Archduchess Maria Theresia, Leopold's aunt and one of the most formidable women in Vienna, had summoned her to tea. Elise's hands shook as she entered the Archduchess's private drawing room. The older woman sat by the window, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her blue eyes sharp as knives. "Sit," the Archduchess commanded, not looking up from her embroidery. "And don't bother with the innocent servant routine. I've been managing this palace for 40 years. Nothing happens here without my knowledge." Elise sat, her spine straight, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "You've been quite useful during the negotiations," Maria Theresia continued, still not looking at her. "The alliance appears to be holding. The Emperor is pleased. My nephew speaks highly of your linguistic abilities." "Thank you, Your Grace." "That wasn't a compliment, child. It was an observation." Now those blue eyes lifted, pinning Elise in place. "What concerns me is that my nephew appears to have developed an unhealthy fascination with you. He watches you constantly, finds excuses to speak with you privately, and last night a housemaid reported seeing him enter the library at midnight, the same library where you were reading, alone." Elise's blood turned to ice. "Nothing happened, Your Grace. I was simply—" "Don't lie to me." The Archduchess set down her embroidery with precise, controlled movements. "I can see it in your face, in his. Whatever is happening between you ends now. Do you understand?" "Your Grace, I never intended—" "Your intentions are irrelevant." Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Leopold is an Archduke of the Habsburg line. He will marry a woman of appropriate station. There are already 3 princesses being considered. You are a servant, a bastard child of a seamstress. This infatuation, or whatever it is, can only end in scandal and ruin, primarily yours." The words cut deep because they were true, every single one. "I understand, Your Grace." "Do you?" Maria Theresia leaned forward. "Because if you truly understood, you would leave Vienna tonight, before this situation escalates further. Before my nephew does something spectacularly foolish that destroys his future and your life. I'm offering you a chance to disappear with a year's wages and a reference for employment elsewhere. Take it." Elise felt tears burning behind her eyes. "And if I don't? Then I will ensure you're dismissed without reference and blacklisted from every respectable household in Austria. You'll be lucky to find work cleaning stables." The Archduchess's expression softened slightly. "I'm not a cruel woman, Elise. I'm being practical. Surely you see that there's no future for you here, not with him." "I see it," Elise whispered. "I've always seen it." "Then prove you're as intelligent as everyone claims and make the right choice." Elise left the drawing room feeling like she'd been gutted. The Archduchess was right. Of course she was right. This thing with Leopold, whatever it was, had no future. It was a fantasy, a beautiful dream that would inevitably shatter against the hard reality of their different worlds. She should leave, should take the money, and run before she fell any deeper, before the inevitable heartbreak became unbearable. But that night, when Leopold found her in the library again, when he kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, she knew she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when his hands cupped her face with such reverence. Not when he whispered Italian poetry against her lips. Not when he looked at her like she was the only person in his entire world who mattered. "I spoke with my aunt today," he murmured between kisses. "She threatened you, didn't she? She offered me a way out. A generous one. And?" His eyes searched hers desperately. "What did you say?" "I'm still here, aren't I?" He kissed her harder, deeper, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. "I can't give you up. I know I should. I know it's selfish and reckless, but I can't. Tell me you feel the same." "I feel the same," she breathed. "God help me, Leopold. I feel exactly the same." They were so lost in each other that neither heard the door open. Neither noticed the Prussian attaché standing in the entrance, his eyes wide with shock before he quietly backed away. By morning the entire palace knew. Leopold stood in the Emperor's private office, his hands clenched behind his back, listening to his uncle's fury with his face carefully blank. But inside, panic clawed at his chest. "Have you lost your mind?" Emperor Franz Joseph's voice thundered through the ornate room. "A servant, Leopold? You're risking everything, your position, your reputation, the family's honor, for a common servant?" "She's not common," Leopold said quietly. "She's extraordinary." "She's a nobody!" The Emperor slammed his hand on the desk. "The negotiations are complete, the alliance is signed, and now we have a scandal brewing that could undermine everything. The Russian ambassador made a pointed comment this morning about Austrian propriety. The Hungarians are laughing at us. And worst of all, Princess Charlotte of Bavaria, your intended bride, has heard the rumors and is reconsidering the engagement." Leopold's jaw clenched. Princess Charlotte. He'd met her twice. A perfectly acceptable aristocrat with blonde hair, blue eyes, and the personality of lukewarm porridge. The kind of wife his family expected. Decorative, obedient, forgettable. Nothing like Elise. "I never agreed to marry Princess Charlotte," he said. "You didn't have to agree, it's your duty. Third in line to the throne cannot marry for love, Leopold. You marry for alliance, for politics, for the empire." His uncle's voice softened slightly. "I understand the temptation. The girl is admittedly clever, and I'm told she's prettier than one might expect from her station. But this ends now, today. Send her away with a generous settlement if you must, but end it. No." The single word dropped into silence like a stone into still water. "What did you say?" Leopold met his uncle's eyes. "No, Your Majesty, I won't send her away. You're refusing a direct order from your Emperor. I'm refusing to destroy the best thing that's ever happened to me for the sake of appearances and political convenience." Leopold's voice was steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm in love with her." Franz Joseph stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You barely know this girl. I know her better than I've ever known anyone. She challenges me, sees past the title to who I actually am. This makes me want to be better than the arrogant fool I was before I met her." Leopold stepped forward. "She saved your alliance, uncle, prevented a war. Doesn't that earn her at least a modicum of respect?" "It earns her gratitude and compensation, not a place in this family." "Then maybe I don't want a place in this family." The words hung between them like a declaration of war. "You would throw away your birthright?" The Emperor's voice was dangerously quiet. "Are your title, your inheritance, your future, all for a woman you've known for 3 days? If that's what it takes, yes." Leopold had never been more certain of anything in his life. The thought of going back to who he was before Elise, shallow, arrogant, sleepwalking through a life of privilege and meaningless duty, was unbearable. She'd woken something in him, made him want things he'd never imagined wanting. Freedom, authenticity, love that wasn't negotiated or arranged or politically advantageous. "You're being a fool," Franz Joseph said flatly. "Probably. But I'd rather be a fool who's happy than a prince who's miserable. Get out of my office and think very carefully about what you're willing to sacrifice. Because if you continue down this path, there will be consequences you can't undo." Leopold bowed stiffly and left, his heart pounding. He'd just effectively ended his life as he knew it. For a woman who might not even want the burden of his love, once she understood what it would cost both of them, he had to find her, had to know if she felt the same certainty. He found Elise in the servants' quarters, packing her meager belongings into a worn trunk. "What are you doing?" His voice came out harsher than intended. She turned, tears streaming down her face. "What I should have done days ago. I'm leaving, Leopold, tonight." "No." He crossed the small room in 2 strides, grabbing her hands. "No, you're not. I have to, don't you see? The whole palace knows. Your family is furious. I'm ruining your life just by existing near you." She pulled her hands free, wiping her eyes. "Your aunt was right. There's no future for us. I was stupid to pretend otherwise." "Stop." He cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me. I just told the Emperor I'd give up everything for you. My title, my inheritance, all of it." "I meant it." Her eyes went wide. "You what?" "I choose you, Elise. If the price of loving you is losing my place in this family, then I'll pay it gladly." "No." She shook her head frantically. "No, you can't do that. You'd regret it eventually. You'd resent me for what you lost. I won't let you sacrifice everything for..." "For what?" "For the woman I love." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You're not a sacrifice. You're the only thing that makes sense in my entire ridiculous life. Leopold, please, run away with me. She went very still. What? Tonight. Now. We'll go to Italy. You speak the language. You have family connections there. We'll start over. I'll find work. I don't care doing what. We'll be poor and scandalous and perfectly happy. He was babbling now, the plan forming as he spoke. Or we'll go to Paris, London, anywhere you want. Just don't leave without me. You're insane, she whispered, but her hands clutched his shirt like she was drowning. Completely insane. You've made me insane. He kissed her desperately. Say yes, please, Elise. Say you'll take this leap with me. She looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes that had seen through him from the start, saw past the title and the privilege to the terrified man underneath, who was so tired of being what everyone expected. If I say yes, she said slowly, and we do this, run away, give up everything, you can never blame me. Never look at me 5 years from now and wish you'd chosen differently, because I couldn't bear that. I couldn't bear being your regret. You could never be my regret. He said it with absolute certainty. You're my salvation. A sob escaped her throat. Then she was kissing him, hard and desperate and full of tears. Yes, she gasped between kisses. Yes, you magnificent idiot. Yes. They planned to leave at dawn. Elise finished packing in silence, her hands shaking with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. She was about to run away with an archduke, abandon the only life she'd ever known, leap into an uncertain future with nothing but love and hope to sustain them. It was the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. It was also the most right. Leopold had gone to gather what money he could access without arousing suspicion, to arrange transportation, to leave a letter for his family explaining his choice. They would meet in the gardens at 5 in the morning, before the palace fully woke. Elise lay in her narrow servant's bed, too nervous to sleep, watching the sky slowly lighten outside her window. In a few hours, her entire life would change. She'd no longer be a servant. She'd be... what? Leopold's wife, eventually, probably. His partner, his equal. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. At 4:30 she rose and dressed in her plainest clothes, gathered her trunk, took one last look at the tiny room that had been her home for 18 years. Goodbye, she thought. Goodbye to invisibility. Goodbye to safety. Goodbye to the girl I was. The palace was silent as she crept through the corridors toward the gardens. Dawn was just beginning to paint the sky pale pink. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She was really doing this. The garden gates came into view, and she saw Leopold waiting, dressed in simple traveling clothes instead of his usual finery. He looked nervous and young and absolutely determined. He saw her and smiled, the kind of smile that made her knees weak. "Ready?" he asked, taking her hand. Terrified, but ready. Good, because once we walk through those gates, there's no going back. I know. She squeezed his hand. I don't want to go back. They walked toward the gates together, toward freedom, toward an unknown future, toward everything they'd ever wanted and never thought they could have. They were 3 steps from the gate when a voice called out behind them. "Leopold, wait!" They both froze. Emperor Franz Joseph stood on the palace steps, still in his nightclothes, looking old and tired in the weak dawn light. The Archduchess Maria Theresia stood beside him, her expression unreadable. Elise's heart sank. They'd been caught. It was over. Leopold's hand tightened on hers. "Uncle, Shut up and listen," Franz Joseph interrupted. He walked down the steps slowly, stopping a few feet from them. "I've been awake all night thinking about what you said, about duty and happiness and what actually matters." He looked at Elise, really looked at her for the first time. "You saved our alliance, prevented a war, demonstrated abilities that would put most of my official diplomats to shame. Is that correct?" Yes, Your Majesty," Elise managed. "And my nephew, despite being an arrogant fool for most of his life, appears to have fallen genuinely, catastrophically in love with you." "Yes, Your Majesty." Franz Joseph sighed heavily. "Maria, you were right, as usual." The Archduchess stepped forward. "I told him that perhaps we've been too rigid, too concerned with appearances and not enough with the actual character of the people involved." She looked at Elise with something that might have been respect. "You could have taken my money and run. Instead, you stayed. You were willing to face scandal and ruin for my nephew. That takes either stupidity or genuine love." "Both, probably," Elise said before she could stop herself. Maria Theresia's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Here is my offer," Franz Joseph said formally. Leopold, you will renounce your place in the direct line of succession. You'll retain a courtesy title, but no longer be third in line to the throne. This removes the political pressure for you to make an advantageous marriage. Leopold nodded slowly. I can accept that. Elise Kowalska, you will be granted a minor noble title. Nothing grand, but enough to make a marriage to Leopold socially acceptable, if barely. You will also be appointed as an official diplomatic consultant to the court, with appropriate compensation and respect. Elise's jaw dropped. Your Majesty, you've earned it. Your linguistic abilities are too valuable to waste on serving tea. We'll announce that you're the previously unknown daughter of a minor Polish noble who was raised in obscurity after your parents' death. It's close enough to the truth that it won't be an obvious lie. You're giving us permission. Leopold sounded stunned. I'm being practical. If I forbid this, you'll run anyway, and we'll lose both your service and hers. This way, we keep you both and avoid a complete scandal. Franz Joseph fixed them with a stern look. But make no mistake, this is conditional. You will conduct yourselves with absolute propriety until a proper wedding can be arranged. Any hint of impropriety, and the offer is rescinded. Understood? Yes, Your Majesty, they said in unison. Good. Now go inside before the entire palace wakes up and sees you trying to elope like characters in a bad romance novel. But his stern expression softened slightly. You're very lucky, both of you. Don't waste it. As Franz Joseph and Maria Theresia walked back into the palace, Elise and Leopold stood frozen in shock. Did that really just happen? Elise whispered. I think so. Leopold started to laugh, a sound of pure, disbelieving joy. We're going to be together. Actually, legitimately together. We were willing to give up everything, and instead we get to keep it all. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. God, I love you. I love you too. She tilted her face up to his. Even though you're still an arrogant fool sometimes. You're arrogant fool, though. My arrogant fool, she agreed, and kissed him as the sun rose over Vienna, painting the sky gold and pink and full of promise. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in a private chapel, with only close family and a few trusted friends in attendance. The court had accepted the official story about Elise's noble parentage with varying degrees of skepticism, but no one dared question it openly. Leopold had renounced his place in succession without regret, and Elise had begun her work as diplomatic consultant with a fierce determination to prove she deserved the position. But none of that mattered as much as this moment, standing before a priest in a cream silk gown that had been the Archduchess's wedding gift, looking into Leopold's eyes as he promised to love and honor her for the rest of his life. I, Leopold Franz von Habsburg, take you, Elise Kowalska, to be my lawfully wedded wife. She could barely hear the words over the pounding of her heart, could barely believe this was real, that the man she loved was promising himself to her, publicly and irrevocably. When it was her turn, her voice shook but didn't waver. I, Elise Kowalska, take you, Leopold Franz von Habsburg, to be my lawfully wedded husband. The priest pronounced them married, and Leopold kissed her with such tender reverence that tears spilled down her cheeks. Lady Elise von Habsburg, he murmured against her lips, has a nice ring to it. It's terrifying, she admitted. I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream. If it is, I'm dreaming too, and I never want to wake up. The wedding breakfast was a small, intimate affair. The emperor gave a toast that was surprisingly heartfelt, acknowledging that sometimes love proved wiser than duty. The Archduchess cornered Elise afterward, pressing a small book into her hands. My personal diary from my first year of marriage, she said quietly. It's not easy navigating this world when you weren't born to it, but you're clever enough to manage, and Leopold is besotted enough to forgive your mistakes. She paused. Make him happy. He's never been happy before. Not really. I'll try, Elise promised. That's all any of us can do. As the celebration wound down, Leopold pulled Elise aside, leading her to a balcony overlooking the city. What are you thinking? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. That a month ago I was invisible, a servant who nobody noticed, and now I'm a diplomat and a wife and a lady, and I have no idea what I'm doing. You're doing beautifully, he kissed her temple. You saved an empire, remember? Marriage should be easy in comparison. She laughed. Somehow I doubt that. Probably wise. He turned her to face him. But we'll figure it out together. Everything together from now on. That's the promise. Everything together, she agreed. As the sun set over Vienna, painting the city in shades of amber and rose, they stayed on that balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, Two people who'd found something rare and precious and worth fighting for. Love that conquered impossibility. Love that rewrote the rules. Love that proved in the end that sometimes the heart knows better than duty what truly matters. 3 years later, Elise stood in the drawing room of their private estate, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching snow fall over the Vienna woods. Their home was modest by Habsburg standards, a small palace rather than a grand one, but it was theirs, filled with books in 5 languages, comfortable furniture worn soft with use, and the kind of quiet happiness Elise had never imagined possible. She heard Leopold's footsteps behind her before his arms slid around her waist, his hands covering hers on her belly. "How are you feeling?" he murmured, kissing her neck. Enormous, uncomfortable, perfectly happy. She leaned back against him. "The baby's been kicking all morning. He's going to be a diplomat like his mother, already making his presence known. Or she. Could be a she. True. So either way, they'll be brilliant and stubborn, and will probably give us grey hair before we're 40. He turned her gently to face him. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up the quiet life for all this chaos?" She pretended to think about it. "Well, there was that scandal last month when I told the French ambassador his trade proposal was insulting. He deserved it. And the ongoing gossip about how the Archduke married so far beneath his station. They're just jealous. And the fact that your family still occasionally looks at me like I'm an exotic bird that wandered into the palace by mistake. My family are idiots." He cupped her face. "But seriously, any regrets?" Elise looked up at the man she loved. The arrogant prince who'd mocked her had become her partner, her best friend, her home. He'd learned 5 languages to match her fluency, still spoke Italian like a romantic, Russian like a drunk, and Hungarian like a very enthusiastic tourist. But he tried. He read her favorite books so they could discuss them, defended her work when courtiers questioned it, rubbed her feet when they ached from standing through diplomatic dinners. "Remember when you told me you'd give up everything for me?" she said softly. "I remember. You did give up everything. Your place in succession, your old life, the easy path for me. Best decision I ever made. Mine too." She pulled him down for a kiss. "Not one single regret, except maybe that it took you so long to realize I was extraordinary." He laughed against her lips. "In my defense, you hid it very well. True, I was excellent at being invisible. You could never be invisible. Not to me. Not anymore." His hand moved over her belly again, as their baby kicked against his palm. "Our child is going to grow up knowing they can be anything, do anything, that titles and station don't define worth. You've already changed so much just by being who you are. We changed it together." "Together," he agreed. "Always together." Outside, snow continued to fall over Vienna, blanketing the city in white. Inside, a former servant and a former prince held each other close, their impossible love story already becoming legend in the halls of the imperial palace. But legends didn't matter. Titles didn't matter. What mattered was this. 2 people who'd seen past everything the world told them was important to find what actually was each other. And years later, when their daughter asked how they fell in love, Leopold would smile and say, "I mocked her. She humiliated me by being brilliant, and then we saved an empire together." And Elise would add, laughing, "Don't forget the part where we were complete idiots about it for at least 3 days. The best 3 days of my life. Mine too." And they'd kiss while their children groaned and complained, and the snow fell over Vienna, and the impossible love story that started with spilled wine and 5 languages lived on, reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes the heart knows better than duty. Love matters more than station, and the most extraordinary people are often the ones we're too blind to see until they save us from ourselves. The end.